All right, we're going to start momentarily. People take their seats, please. Hey. Awesome to have you over here. So I'm going to talk for 15 minutes, and I sit down. You guys take it over. So if I get if people take their seats, please, we'll get started momentarily. If I back away, turn that off. Can you hear me in the back? Is the microphone on? Can you hear me in the back? Brad? Yes? Okay. I realize there's an alignment of Brads actually between the three of us. That works out pretty well. All right, so I recognize I made a terrible, terrible mistake in putting myself after Lisa. Lisa, that's just trying to follow, I don't know, like the Rolling Stones or something, being the second band up. That was not a good plan on my part. But we're going to turn to the topic of accelerators. And my claim is that mentor-driven accelerators, and I'll define that here momentarily, represent a variant of peer production that is sustainable and will persist going forward. That is, the new models of collaborative information production that we see in the accelerator is not a fluke, and that accelerators, in fact, represent a form of what I call for-profit peer production that is already important in information industries today, and it's likely to get even more important tomorrow. So with that, there's three perspectives I'm going to try to cover in the next 15 minutes. First, what is an accelerator? Make sure everyone's baselined up. Second, I'm going to give you a hypothesis, a quick word about the accelerator structure as it relates not to costs, but to value creation. That is how the structure creates value. And third is a claim, and that is an important question. We've got the accelerator industry. Is it built to last, or is it going to go away? And I'm going to argue that it is sustainable for reasons that may not be readily apparent. So what is the accelerator? This is, in my estimation, the most important innovation in the 21st century with respect to the support of startups and entrepreneurs. Did not exist at all until 2005. Paul Graham founds Y Combinator out in Boston. He soon after that moves it to Silicon Valley. The next year, David Cohen starts Techstars. And now there's over 5,500 entities worldwide that self-identify as an accelerator. I think there's a key distinction between accelerators that make investments in startups that participate versus non-investment accelerators. And by making investment, I mean giving a startup some amount of outside capital in exchange for an ownership stake of the company. With respect to investment accelerators, those that are making the investment, those are a minority of the 5,500 accelerators worldwide, but in terms of economic importance, they are probably much more important, and right now there's at least $30 billion of portfolio company valuation in startups that have gone through investment accelerators. Boulder has played an outsized role in creating this industry. So here are 9 entities that are out of Boulder. Top left, as I said, Techstars was a pioneer in the accelerator movement and has in particular pioneered a particular form of accelerator, the mentor-driven accelerator, which relies on its expertise from a network of volunteers to Techstars. We'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. That model is promulgated by the leading accelerator organization called GAN, the Global Accelerator Network, which was spun out of Techstars. And importantly, the playbook that GAN gives the world is the mentor-driven one. The Unreasonable Institute Banks is going to be here. That was a pioneer in, and still is, in social entrepreneurship for accelerators. The bottom is Catalyze CU here on campus. University accelerators are a movement. Boomtown, you saw Sue from Merge Lane, Secure Set Canopy, and Black Lab Sports are all here out of Boulder. So what is it? An accelerator is a little bit of a Frankenstein. It is a hodgepodge of things that existed in the startup community but didn't quite exist in this unified form. So for example, the accelerator will bring about 10 startups together at a time. They stay together for 3 to 4 months. A common structure is that the accelerator will give the startup about $25,000 in exchange for a piece of the company. Typical is 5 to 7% of the company. So to the extent that it's bringing startups together and co-locating them for a given period of time, that space element feels like what we used to call an incubator. Second, to the extent that the startup is providing money, getting money in exchange for a piece of the company, that starts to feel like an angel investment, and in particular, a micro venture capitalist. And to the extent that startups come, learn together, and exit together at the same time, there's a strong educational component, and that feels arguably like an MBA light. So I studied accelerators. I did about 50 interviews, a little bit south of that formally, a little bit north of that informally, across 17 different accelerators, and here is what I found. In terms of how accelerators are organized, there are 3 important takeaways. The first is that you'll see the arrows in these relationships represent formal agreements. That is, there is a legally binding contract between the people who provide money to the accelerator at the top and the accelerator itself. The people at the top act a lot like limited partners. And the folks in the middle, the accelerator principals, are essentially general partners who are putting that money to work. They put that money to work by selecting portfolio companies who come and spend that 3 to 4 months in the accelerator. These are very early stage startups, and they build their business at that time. For a high prestige accelerator like, say, Techstars, you'll have an additional fund that will provide money, say $100,000 in a convertible note that the companies can pull. That comes from a different formal relationship. And then at the end of the program, you'll often see investors, angels, and venture capitalists come in and make a formal, legally binding investment in the companies themselves. However, you see a mingling of those formal relationships with these red squiggly lines, which indicates informal relationships. And in particular, the secret sauce of a mentor-driven accelerator is a network of serial entrepreneurs and functional specialists who have no formal relationship with either the startups themselves that they help directly, nor the accelerator entity that is selecting the startups. And to me, that's an interesting scenario. So 3 key takeaways from this. First, you see a mingling of formal and informal relationships. Second, if you look at the range of stakeholders that the accelerator brings together, it truly spans the entire startup community. And third, we have this very interesting feature that the crucial input in terms of expertise is frequently organized through volunteers. Okay? So, why? I'm going to give you one explanation that is a hypothesis and then another explanation that speaks to why I think this is more sustainable than people might think. And I want to be clear, this is noodling at this point, but my hypothesis is that this structure for information exchange actually produces a better type of creative contribution than other structures. That is, mentors, the same mentor provides better information when the feeling is one of volunteerism than when she or he is subject to a formal agreement or brought within the structure of the company. So that's a hypothesis. I don't want to dwell on that too long in this discussion, but that's a first reason why this structure might make some sense. The second point is this, that my claim is this looks a lot like peer production. Okay, so I've got the Linux Penguin, which represents peer production of open source software, Wikipedia, and also the Mars Rover project, which many of you might be aware the mapping for that was an open source peer production volunteer-driven project. So what do we have when we talk about peer production? Many volunteers to an information-based project, and the crucial contributions to the project are at some level voluntary. Interesting feature here is that as we move from large digital peer production projects over to the Accelerator, the crucial difference is not so much who contributes to the production. It remains a large number of individuals. The crucial difference is the access restrictions on what is produced. When we're talking about Wikipedia, that is a good that once many people create it, is now available to many people on an open basis. When we're talking about the product that a startup and an accelerator creates, we're often talking about a good that many people help create, but that it's closed in terms of access. This is what Yochai Benkler has called a sucker's game. Okay? So just to be clear, might make sense that we get lots of people who are public-minded and want to contribute to a publicly available product. But now when we jump over to the Accelerator, we get the public contributions, and then it's a bit of a bait and switch where it's going to be captured in terms of benefits by a private entity. So is this a sucker's game? And an interesting question in terms of the sustainability of the Accelerator is, if it's a sucker's game, will accelerators go away? And my contention is no. Why? Two reasons. The first is that the Accelerator changes the structure of exchange. It transforms what otherwise would be a direct reciprocity exchange into one that occurs within a generalized exchange system. Let me explain. Let's say that the yellow dot, number one, is an experienced serial entrepreneur, someone with a lot of guidance, an expert with respect to startups, and dot number two here is a startup that needs that advice. Okay? Outside of the Accelerator system, the mentor, or the expert serial entrepreneur, number one, might help number two, and number two really needs that help, right? The startup needs all sorts of outside advice, connections into the industry, etc. But it may not necessarily be that number two has anything that the expert mentor really needs. Okay? Maybe, but maybe not. What do we see in an Accelerator system? We see the same kind of exchange where the serial entrepreneur, now a mentor, number one, provides help to the startup, number two, but there doesn't have to be direct reciprocity back. In fact, a common scenario is that number two has a relationship, say, with another investor, an angel investor or a venture capitalist 3, and or a managing director within the Accelerator 4. And what does this allow? This allows for a unilateral give from the serial entrepreneur, from the mentor to the company, without any expectation of a give back at that time. In the generalized exchange system, the give is unilateral. But note, it's not purely altruistic, because now the mentor is part of a system, and he or she does not necessarily know when the benefit's going to come back, how it's going to come back, what form, or what this exactly is going to look like, but they sort of trust that this series of exchanges will produce something. Maybe, for example, it's by being part of this system, the mentor meets a venture capitalist who ultimately invests in her company. Maybe it's by being part of this system and a valuable mentor that when a hot accelerator company starts looking for an experienced CEO, the managing director, where's Nicole? Nicole picks up the phone and calls, say, Paul Berberian, and says, would you potentially be interested in being CEO of this interesting company called Robotics, now Sphero, right? The benefit circulates around, and we've transformed a bilateral relationship into one in which it's characterized by multilateral trades that allows for time shifting, a unilateral give at time one. The second reason why I think that this is sustainable is in my interviews with mentors, it turns out that there are a lot of private gains associated with mentorship. And let me walk you through some of the motivations of people who are involved in these networks. One is it's just a ton of fun. You hear mentors say things like, Accelerator mentorship is all the fun of running a company without having to live it and die with it 24 hours and 7 days a week. I get to live vicariously through the energy of these founders. Second is a sense of volunteerism. God, I know how hard it is to found a company. I know how lonely that can be. I want to provide that help to somebody, and they feel enlivened by the volunteer mission associated with that. Third, staying fresh. One mentor that I spoke with had a company exit. He was out of the game for 2 years, and he said getting back involved in the Accelerator, where I could see 10 to 12 companies in one sitting, allowed my scanning capabilities to get up high. I was able to get up to speed in a hurry. In addition to seeing technology trends, mentors highlight that they also get to see investment trends. Where is money going with respect to angels as well as venture capitalists? Fourth, opportunity leads. Investments, for example, I'm a mentor for a company. Maybe I'll invest in this company, but this allows me to see 9 other promising companies at the same time, as well as meet a network of mentors, some of whom might see other deal flow that I don't, and now I'm getting additional opportunities that I would not otherwise get. Fifth is the network, such as mentor-to-mentor relationships. One startup had mentor dinners once a week in which they had the 4 mentors associated with their company come together. The mentors that I spoke with said that that was a phenomenal experience, not just because they were getting to help the startup, but because they were getting to hear the smart things that the other mentors were saying around the table. And then finally, and one person said, I don't know how much it would have cost to organize this myself. Finally, reputation. The term for this is indirect appropriation, and that refers to this. Mentors don't have to benefit directly within the Accelerator system. The reputational benefits of being a mentor may be captured from those outside the Accelerator system. For example, a marketing expert said that by virtue of having Techstars on his resume, people come and say, oh, he must know things. I want to do business with him, and I asked, do you have Techstars up on your LinkedIn account, your resume? I was like, oh, absolutely. That was one of the first things that I did. Okay? Additionally, reputation can work this way if you're an investor. David Su has found that high reputation venture capitalists pay 10 to 14% less for the same deal as average or low reputation VCs. So note, if you're a venture capitalist who's associated with being a high-profile, great mentor, someone who's doing good, and this raises your reputation in the startup community overall, you are able to capture the benefit of that reputational gain from a third party, such as another startup that wants to take your term sheet. All right. So finally, in terms of concluding, I think at the end of the day, accelerators represent a form of organization that is not just a fad, but with respect to information flows, it's a pretty significant innovation. And I don't think it's necessarily going to go away because it allows for, at the core level, a have your cake and eat it too experience, where mentors get to feel like volunteers. They get to feel like they're making a real public-oriented contribution, and in some respects they are. But that is aligned behind the scenes with strong private gains associated with mentorship. Thank you.
Guys, give a short introduction of yourselves.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Brad. Great presentation. I'm going to start by having each of the panelists tell you just a couple of sentences about themselves, and then we'll dive right into questions. Tim?
Hi, it's on. My name is Tim Kuhn. I'm a professor in the communication department here at CU. And so I'm somewhat of an outsider. I am not in either law school, and I've been an observer of the startup scene for a while, in particular doing an observational study of an accelerator here in Boulder. And so one of my roles is to ask lots of questions. And so I'm interested here to share my observations, but also ask lots of questions to the people here.
I'm Nicole Glaros. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Techstars. I started my entrepreneurial career when I was in college and did a couple companies, and then actually got involved in accelerators back in 2002. So they actually do date back farther than 2005. And I've been with Techstars since it started in 2007. I joined in like late 2008, early 2009. Have run about 8 accelerator programs myself, and have trained many, if not most, of the managing directors that have gone through Techstars. So I've had a big, long, painful career in the accelerator space.
I'm Owen Davis. I run a venture fund or a seed fund in New York City called NYC Seed. And way back when we first started, we ran the first accelerator called Seed Start in New York. And I guess relevant to this crowd, I also teach a innovation course at Columbia Law for attorneys.
Great. I am Banks from the Unreasonable Institute. We are a social impact accelerator here based in Boulder. I led up our mentor network for a couple of years, so know our mentor network. Many of them are here today. And now I help train other accelerator leaders that are scaling Unreasonable Institutes around the world. So we're launching new programs in different countries around the world and trying to figure out how to launch accelerators in emerging markets in different countries.
Okay, and I'm Jen Rosenthal. I'm an attorney at Kendall, Koenig, and Oelsner here in town. I'm a mentor for Techstars, and I'm the adjunct professor here at CU. So Tim, I want to start with you. Given that accelerators are relatively new, how is communication changing in your interactions and when you're observing accelerators and studying them? How does that interaction change is different from just sort of other interactions and organizational communications that you observe within either other industries or just completely outside?
That's a great question. One of the things that the accelerator space is intended to do is to try to create knowledge that is leaky, if you've heard that term, leaky knowledge, so that it doesn't stick to one person or group. And so one of the hopes is that the accelerator process is going to create communicative exchanges that don't just coordinate and control activity, but that also provide the capacity for shared understandings, for new innovations to come out, things that people wouldn't have expected otherwise. And so the lack of any kind of form within the accelerator space, the lack of formal relationships, the formal responsibilities, a hierarchy to which all sides comply, suggests that perhaps there can be something new, unexpected, unanticipated that comes out of that. And so part of the hope is that people will sort of venture outside of themselves. So of course they're working on their own projects as entrepreneurs in that space. Of course mentors are part of this, but at the same time what they're doing is they're trying to create something that gets them to stray away from what they think they know and what they think they're doing to experiment in ways that other sites wouldn't allow.
Okay. So Owen, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that. Not only are you involved in a venture capital fund, but you are also a longtime entrepreneur and have been involved in startup community long before accelerators existed. And so, I mean, would you agree with Tim that you sort of need that accelerator to drive those types of interactions, or is that something that you've seen and you just think that maybe it all happens in one place with an accelerator?
I mean, so one of the great things about it, sort of that sort of model, is it's a touch point. And it's a very concrete touch point for a lot of different things, number one. The point of the accelerator, in some ways, one could say, is you want to decrease the learning curve, right? You want to sort of make sure that being an entrepreneur on your own with sort of no guidance is extremely inefficient, right? I mean, you're going to experiment, and if you don't, there is a lot of sort of literature available these days and online and whatnot. But historically, it's been extremely inefficient to learn the lessons. And now one can sort of say that there's a set of things that are relatively repeatable, that if you could that probably could apply generally to sort of the vast majority of startups. And the great mechanism of an accelerator is it allows you to sort of like cobble together a lot of the sort of those unsort of written lessons, the leaky information, right? And sort of pull them together and sort of orally transmit them. That's great. I think that the question of sort of, is it sustainable, and I think we'll probably get to that, is a really interesting question, because it means that there does need to be a generation of people that have a level of expertise that is going to basically continue to sort of function in that capacity. And I think the question then becomes scale.
Yeah, so in addition to expertise, Nicole, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. You've been involved with accelerators for a long time. As they've become less of an experiment and more of a proven model with sort of a stamp of approval, how have you seen the motivations of mentors change in wanting to join and be involved?
So I think as the accelerator model has advanced and there is some reputation that's associated with being part of an accelerator, you get mentors that want to be associated with the program just because of the brand, that like they want to be able to put on their LinkedIn profile, hey, I'm a Techstars mentor. And as we've seen the sort of number of accelerators grow, I actually think that becomes a problem, because you get people that are not qualified to be mentors, that are not qualified to give advice and mentorship, that are actively doing so. So one of the things that we really focus on at Techstars, and we also, as we're working with other accelerators, we really encourage them to think very deeply about who is providing mentorship to the companies. You need experienced entrepreneurs. So we categorize our mentors into we group them into two different categories. We group them into functional experts or sort of lead mentors. So lead mentors are experienced entrepreneurs that have been through the full life cycle of a company from idea all the way through exit at least one time. Our best mentors have done it 4, 5, 6, 7 times, right? It's really hard. You cannot learn entrepreneurship from reading a book. You can't learn entrepreneurship from reading blogs. You have to learn it by doing. So when you have those kind of people coaching entrepreneurs, they provide great insight. We also have functional mentors, where people have deep expertise in a simple area, or in a single area, and they can provide extreme depth of knowledge in one particular thing. So as we work with mentors, I think motivations have changed because people want brand recognition, right? Like, I'm associated with Techstars, or I'm associated with whatever accelerator. But it's up to us to make sure that we're presenting the best mentors to the companies, so the best advice and guidance gets to the companies.
Okay, and so what if someone is one of those people, right? They're a lead mentor or a functional expert, but they're also, as Brad points out in his presentation, in it for a lot of the private gains. The fun, the volunteerism, the fresh, the opportunities, and the reputation. And so they definitely see sort of an individual component and a personal gain. Does that bother you at all, or do you think that there's enough other constraints in there in sort of an accelerator to make sure that any sort of opportunism is hemmed in?
Yeah, so I don't believe in altruism. I think we get something out of everything, or you won't do it. Even donating money, you feel good. That's what you get out of it, right? I think understanding and bringing those motivations to light and making sure that they're aligned is extremely powerful. When you know what the motivations are, and then you can align people behind a singular goal, then magic happens. So that's how we get a guy like Paul Berberian to join Orbotics, because we understood what the motivations are. We know what his expertise is. Everybody goes into it knowing, and magic happens at the other end because everybody's motivations are aligned, right? When I think paying attention to those things is actually critical to the success of an ecosystem that's built. I mean, if a mentor's not having fun, if they're not getting anything out of it, they're not going to put that much into it. Or they're not going to think really carefully about the question that an entrepreneur gives them. They're going to give them a half-assed answer. The entrepreneur is going to go off and make a decision based on a half-assed answer. right? So getting people to be all the way bought in, emotionally attached to it, excited, having put their real thought and energy behind it, and understanding what their motivations in doing so is actually very powerful. And it makes a win-win for everyone.
Banks, do you agree with Nicole, and do you think that there's any change that you've seen as a representative of the Unreasonable Institute, whose mission is a little bit more high impact and designed to meet sort of social injustice and other goals?
Yeah, so we definitely attract mentors who are interested in trying to tackle with the entrepreneur some sort of big social or environmental problem. That's definitely something like you want to work on healthcare in emerging markets or education system in Eastern Europe, and they get really bought into that cause and that mission. They get excited about it. But I definitely agree with Nicole that there are, we have 150 to 175 mentors in our network that we're trying to juggle. And so they all have different desires and needs and motivations. And so our job is to figure out, to map them and figure out, okay, what's their expertise, what's their superpower, what kind of role will they play within our ecosystem, and then align a relationship with an entrepreneur in a way that they feel like it's really rewarding. At the end of the day, if they're just doing it in a sort of a half-assed way, they're not going to be really driving value. And as Brad argued, that's the key value that we provide as a mentor-based accelerator program, is our mentors and the expertise that they bring. And so we really need to find a way where it can be a win-win for them. And so we do find that and there are some mentors who that are in it just for the relationships with other mentors that are not entrepreneur-focused. And if their motivations are a little bit out of sync, then we will talk to them and say, hey, look, this is not working out. You're here for the entrepreneurs. You're here for the impact. It seems like your priorities are misaligned, and so we're going to actually ask you to not be a mentor. And so we do like a culling process as well. Entrepreneurs are poor when it comes to resources of money, but all they have is their time. And so as an accelerator program, we have a role to curate the best network we possibly can. And that means actively uninviting people who are not doing that. It doesn't happen that often, I think, but when it does happen, it's very clear that it's not working out, and we have to kind of proceed.
Okay, and so the remedy then is to not invite them back to the program, it sounds like.
Yeah, if there's a mentor that's in it and they're not being Socratic, they're just talking about themselves the whole entire time, they're not caring about the entrepreneur, and they're in it more for the networking and other private gains, then we will absolutely say, look, this is not working out. The key is to have some sort of conversation about that. At least what we do is say, hey, look, this is why it's not working out. And sometimes mentors will say, oh my gosh, I really want to be in here for the right reasons, and they'll change and be more committed.
And so, Owen, I'm interested to hear your perspective as Accelerators started to develop and come together. You've obviously had a lot of involvement, both directly and indirectly. Why do you think that they don't use formal contracts? And why do you think, look at your own participation or involvement, or why is it that you're sort of willing to give time to something that isn't going to sort of directly compensate you or protect you, either one?
Well, I think I'm sort of conflicted in this because obviously I'm an investor, right? And so I have a fund, and so being involved in sort of accelerators in general is very much part of what I do, right? And it's I think if I were to sort of take myself out of that role and say sort of an external sort of mentor who isn't financially going to sort of benefit or isn't financially, it's not what they do. They're not looking for sort of like companies and interesting sort of ways to be part of the community. Obviously, I get, all of the sort of things that Brad mentioned in terms of the value of sort of doing it. Is pretty obvious, right? It's very clear when you're running an accelerator, like why people are there, right? They want to be involved, and there are many, many people that don't have a mechanism by which to really get involved in the way that they want to get involved. One of the great, sort of a very small scale sort of example of this is meetups. And I know there are meetups here, there's meetups in New York, there's a monthly meetup in New York where approximately 700 or 800 people attend. Now, many of those people are actually either first time or actually not part of the startup world, which I think is extremely interesting, right? Because that has become a vehicle for them by which they can sort of be part of something, get around it, they know that they have this idea of sort of being involved, and they need a mechanism by which to do it, right? So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, which is the sort of much more experienced sort of set of folks, right? You're a founder of a company, you had an exit, your crew is this crew, right? And you're involved, and it's your way of sort of being involved in what you do. What you do is you start companies and you get them funded and you sort of connect them to people. And so there's that other aspect of it, which is you're much more professional in it. It's much more of a career sort of thing. But, you do that because it's what you do for your career. And so I think those are sort of the two sort of why I do it, and, it's some sort of aspect of many of those different issues, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim, would you agree with Brad's assessment that people are more creative and mentors are more creative in their communication outside of a formal contract, just as, someone who's been studying communication?
Yeah, of course, not everybody, but yeah, for the most part, I think they are. But I think that comes back to the varieties of motivations that people can draw upon, as the other folks here have been talking about. One of the ways that I've been starting to think about this is to see mentors and the puzzle of why they contribute to what they do in a way that seems to be uncompensated. And Brad nicely suggests, there's a lot of forms of compensation. Outside of monetary compensation, to see mentors as craftspersons or craftsmen, but craftspersons more broadly. So they have a craftsperson has a desire to do a job well for its own sake, and they try to cultivate skill, commitment, and judgment. And this is related to the broader scene is interested in seeing the person as maker, homo faber. And to think about ourselves as builders, as creating something. There's some interest in doing just that. And so one of the interests that I think people in this scene have is to create something, to generate craft, that there's a real desire not to see oneself as merely a business person who doesn't work in a corporation, or as a coder who's got the next gig, but as somebody who's making something. And I think that the idea of mentors participating in this way helps them cultivate that sense of themselves. And also, there's something just fun about this for the people, at least the ones who I've talked to, that they're very interested in this. And they also want to hone that sense of judgment that I mentioned before. Judgment about what works, judgment about what doesn't work, judgment about this network. So yeah, there are some personal motivations here, but I think those motivations are not always purely instrumental, or not always clearly connected to instrumental outcomes. That they have some sense that there is an entrepreneurial imagination that they want to occupy, that they want to have as part of who they see themselves to be.
Thanks. Nicole, I think that it's easy for a lot of us to imagine why an accelerator here in Boulder is sustainable. I think a lot of us who work here or live here or have friends and family here feel the same sort of reputational constraints around those areas as we do around an accelerator, just because it's a small town and everybody knows each other. And how does that, and so all of us here, we see how an accelerator works here. How do you take that and, place it somewhere like New York or London or other places where Techstars are? Does it work the same way? Is it as easy to set up? And is it sustainable in those places the same way it's sustainable here?
That's a great question, and it's something that we're learning as we go, right? There have definitely been different experiences that we've had in each location where we've opened offices. I would say that New York was actually our biggest challenge. So we had opened up a bunch of offices prior to New York, but the New York ecosystem and culture in New York was very different than all the other places we had previously been. So it was a learning experience, right? I think one of the things that we didn't understand at the time that we're understanding more now is to understand a local culture and how that culture fits into to an accelerator, not how an accelerator fits into the culture. So start with the culture first, understand what the unique things about that culture are, then say, okay, how do we take that and put an accelerator that can be successful? Like, that's the thing to do. So we just announced one in Tel Aviv, right? Tel Aviv is radically different than anything. The culture is radically different than anything we've ever experienced. So we're spending a lot of time talking to people. And one of the things that we've really learned there is that actually there are a lot of people that are really excited to mentor, but not a lot of people that are really excited to be mentored. Because to be mentored means that you're weak and that you don't know what you're doing, right? So, okay, we're like, okay, so maybe we don't talk about it as mentorship. Maybe we talk about it as something else. So understanding those unique cultural perspectives and making it work there, I think, is really critical to the success. And you make mistakes as you go. But I think one thing that we've really learned that's universally true is tech is a pretty small ecosystem in anywhere you go. And reputation is everything. So a person's individual reputation, like, that's one of the reasons why the NDA no NDA works in this ecosystem, is because intrinsic motivations on not damaging your reputation are pretty high versus relying on some extrinsic motivation like a contract to get it done. The reputation is true in every ecosystem we've ever been in.
So do you have an example of that where someone has, in the past ever sort of breached the code of conduct and suffered a reputational hit? And can you talk, a little bit more generally about that?
Yes and no. So no, I can't talk specifically about it. I can talk generally about it. We've definitely had a couple bad actors. Those bad actors have very quickly been expelled from not only the ecosystem, but what we radically discovered is that it went, much to our both delight and chagrin, it went well beyond the Techstars ecosystem, right? So as soon as somebody's reputation gets damaged, it gets outside of Techstars really quickly and into the local community, and those people have a really hard time getting anything done, right? So, I know of an instance where a person had to move, and I actually think that's terrible. But on the other hand, what that does is elevate everybody to an incredibly high standard of behavior that is really powerful, right? So there's a good and a bad to it. As Techstars, we talk a lot about that because we don't want to be judge and jury. That's not what we think that we are, although we have been in situations when we're like, wow, this is really tricky and hard to figure out, and what do we do, right? But I don't know, I think reputation is really important. I think it works in this ecosystem. Tech is very small compared to everything else. So you protect your reputation.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing, and I think there was some mention of sort of game theory, right? And the reality of being sort of in any sort of close sort of community where you're constantly, there's co-opetition one day and then there's competition the next, it's a sequential game, right? And it's very much, regardless of what industry you're in, an industry with a sequential game means that a one-shot deal of being a bad actor means you're out, right? And therefore, that's what keeps people in line, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever it is, because you do need to be a good citizen because you have to cooperate with everybody else. And your livelihood and your sort of everything else, separate from sort of who you are and your own sort of personal sort of integrity, is dependent on being part of that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that that's something new with accelerators and this, or is this something that you've been seeing, prior to accelerators, just in your involvement in being an entrepreneur and being a venture capitalist?
Look, this is sort of historically, this is what keeps people sort of as part of the community. And whether you want to look at, micro loan payments, and the whole sort of Grameen thing where a peer guarantee, which was sort of mentioned earlier, but a peer guarantee was as important as anything in the early days of Grameen, where your entire village was guaranteeing the loan, which means you absolutely were going to make sure that you paid that loan back, right? And so, this is not exclusive to sort of entrepreneurship, of course, or anything. I think it's about sort of a ongoing sort of community involvement requires that a sequential, you view it as sort of this ongoing relationship.
Yeah.
I would add, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask a question, but so I'll let you.
Well, the only thing I was going to add is I don't think it's unique to tech. I totally agree. But I do think what makes tech unique in this is that everyone in tech is on tech. So with Twitter and Facebook and every other digital tool, reputation spreads beyond your local geography, where in other ecosystems that they might not be as reliant on social, like social technology, tech is unique in that your bad acting will spread well beyond your immediate physical geography, which can be like spread throughout the entire tech ecosystem across not only the United States, but we're becoming global now, right? So, it's special.
Yeah, Banks, do you agree that it's sort of, that's what's unique about accelerators is sort of the density and the ability to disseminate information quickly, not necessarily the reputational constraints themselves?
Yeah, I think so, and I think Nicole's right with technology. It definitely proliferates much faster.
Sorry. My question was going to be about the talk or the discourse of failure within not just accelerators, but in the startup community more generally. Do you think that I'm questioning my panelists here. Do you think that allows people to not feel like they need to engage in opportunism to be successful, and of course the community will boot them out as you suggested, but that it's okay to be a failure, that it's actually sometimes a badge of honor to have tried to start something up and fail at it, and that can be something that mitigates the pressure to be that bad actor, whether it's a mentor or an entrepreneur?
So I guess I'll answer that. So I would, in the early days, we would have wakes. We would have startup wakes, where when a company died, we would all gather around the entrepreneur and take that entrepreneur out for dinner and or drinks and really celebrate what that entrepreneur went through, and then work really hard to try to get that person back on their feet. I mean, to start a company is you risk everything. And it isn't just, maybe your reputation, but it's your livelihood and your savings and your hopes and your dreams and, all these things that you risk. So to discourage that behavior, I think is an absolute travesty, right? So celebrating failure, not that we want to celebrate the failure itself, but we want to celebrate the risk that somebody took. That is such a powerful thing to stand behind people who have failed. I think that it's not failing that's bad. It's in how you fail that could be bad or good. I've talked to entrepreneurs when they knew that it was going to go down. They very quickly, ended all payments and returned as much capital as they could to their investors and was highly communicative with everybody. And if you're a really good and responsible, steward of capital and, in technology and people, when you're going through a failure, I think everyone will rally around you to do it again. If you're not, it's not in the act of failing, it's in how you handle the failure going down, right? So if you hide and you with your tail between your legs and you don't return capital and you lie to everybody about what's really going on, you've got another different problem. So it's not the failure, it's the behavior around it.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think we try to destigmatize it as best as possible. We're exploring launching new institutes in different countries, and I just got back from Japan, where we were looking at a program there. And the culture there around failure is quite different, and it was interesting that was the biggest impediment to people actually going out and starting a business was the honor and the disgrace that might come from that. And so again, I think Nicole says something that's right, at least what we're seeing too as you're beginning to move into different markets around the world, which is you can't just replicate an accelerator program into a culture, but really understand, okay, what are the specific issues that we're encountering? I think here in the US, at least in the startup community, failure is in many ways destigmatized. We're talking about, we're embracing it, we're holding wakes. These are things that's weird, right? Generally, it's strange that we're doing that, but I think it's really, it's important to do. But as you begin to look in different cultures, it definitely is it's a different challenge and perhaps one of the biggest uphill battles that you face.
So the one thing that I'll add is that it's more than just sort of destigmatized here, though there's still definitely, stigma around sort of failing. But the U.S. is very unique, and this is sort of exactly for this audience would certainly know best, in its set of laws that protect sort of the corporation, right, and that protect the individual. And if you go to many places around the world, you are personally responsible for the default of the loan, right, regardless of sort of how it's structured, right, or you can't possibly, and so there's all of those things that are built into our system that allow at least startups and personal liability and sort of the separation between those two things to exist. And that's very important in order to make this
Owen, can you fix the student lending laws?
Right.
So to move away from such leading questions and a little bit closer to a more open-ended question, let's tackle a big one. Are accelerators sustainable? And if so, why? And if not, why? Banks, you want to start?
From a financial perspective, from a mentor perspective, I mean, I think.
Tackle whatever else you want.
So for Unreasonable Institute, we are philanthropically funded. We focus on really early stage social risk. And so those types of entrepreneurs we see does require a philanthropic funder to at least get them to kind of pass this initial stage. And so we rely on that. The companies that we work with are not having relatively quick exits. There aren't major liquidity events. And so many of them don't ever exit. And so we're helping them scale and grow, and we're looking at taking profit shares and revenue shares with them, or we'll charge tuition plus a revenue share. So our model is definitely different than what a tech incubator accelerator might pursue. So from that end, our sustainability is not for-profit. We're not breaking even without philanthropic subsidy. So from that side, I think is unsustainable, at least what we're talking about from a for-profit side. When it comes to mentorship, we have endless amounts of mentors that want to come work with us. So from trying to engage informal mentor relationships, it does seem quite sustainable. We don't really see mentors beginning to like run out or get sort of fatigued through accelerator programs. Some Techstars mentors are mentors with us and Boomtown mentors, and so we see there's a lot of mentors will sort of circulate and serve different entrepreneurs. They cite all of the gains that Brad mentioned as motivations for being involved, and we're really lucky to be able to get such incredible mentors to work with us, and we don't really see that being a problem. So from the sort of informal mentor relationships, I think it's really strong.
Owen, thoughts on that? And do you have any thoughts specifically on the fact that we've gone from sort of 2 accelerators to hundreds, and what do you think about that?
So, I guess a couple of things. I mean, the one issue I think, which is sort of how does this thing scale, is really the real issue. I think as these sort of accelerators become more popular, and I know. Look, my experience is very much sort of rooted in New York, but I know for a fact that folks that I regularly talk with, work with, do make the rounds in terms of sort of accelerators and demo days and whatnot. But I also know that for the first time over the last year or two, there's been sort of like you can't do it, right? They sort of get asked, and then the question then becomes, like how close are you to sort of the people running the specific accelerator? Is it a favor, right? Versus is it sort of getting something out of it? When there's so much of it, when you actually, when this group of mentors, and it's not an infinite group of people, right? It's you need a group of people that have experience, right? And actually are willing to sort of, and spend time and whatnot. And so the bar is relatively high for them. And so given that that's the case, and their sort of the demands on their time is probably great, how do you make sure that group of people, it's not a pyramid, right? This isn't a multi-level marketing, sort of where you can recruit a new group of people every day to sort of like sell your soap, right? This is, a sort of very specialized group of people that actually sort of need to sort of keep the ecosystem going. And so I think at scale, it's an interesting issue because I've seen it happen in New York now for the first time. And that's both on the demo days and helping startups and whatnot. So the second question was what? Or I've spoken too long?
I think you got it. I think it was just commenting on, if you think that there's an oversaturation sort of the accelerators and whether there's sort of a decrease in equality as a result.
I have only one thing to say about that. How many great companies are started every year in the U.S., right? Or around the world, right? There's not an infinite number, right? And just to note that, Y Combinator started years ago, it had 5 companies, 8 companies, 10 companies. I think the last class, I don't know what number the final number was, in 110 companies, and that's just one program, right? And so, how many really good companies are deserving at the end of the day, that have great teams and ideas and technology and sort of all of those things that get aligned, scarce, not an infinite number. So.
Yeah. Nicole, thoughts on that? And is more accelerators into the market about, accelerators in general or Techstars specifically being sustainable?
So I think Techstars has reached an interesting point in its life cycle where I actually believe that it's sustainable, but I think that for a single accelerator program, it's going to be hard. It's very expensive to run an accelerator, and in exchange for the amount of equity that you're getting, like there's this tension between the amount of resources that you're putting into a company, the amount of equity that you're getting out, and those companies needing to exit at a certain value in order for an accelerator to be sustainable. For most of the people in the room, if you don't know, most accelerator models are of an investor. So they will take equity in the company. So if they don't have successful exits, then the accelerator can't sustain itself. So Techstars is in an interesting place in its growth trajectory where we have over 700 companies in our portfolio now. The portfolio is worth something like $5 billion. Like I don't actually even know. I stopped counting, I think, when we got over $1 billion. So the likelihood of exits there for us, and just because of sheer numbers, is pretty high. And that's a similar game to what Y Combinator plays. We played a little bit different than they do, but when you're adding 120 companies, I think it's 120 per class, times 2 classes a year, after a certain number of years, your at-bat average is, you're going to get some pretty nice home runs. Like it's just a numbers game. So at scale, I think it can work. I think as a single accelerator, we're only investing in 10 companies a year, and you've got a budget of probably, if you're really lucky, $750,000 is probably less than that. It's probably $500,000. Man, and you got to raise that money every year, and it's going to be 7 to 10 years before you can ever really show a return to your investors. Those are hard games to play. So is it sustainable? I think it can be. I think it's tricky to get there. Right, and this question on scale, like we ask ourselves that every day. Like Techstars and Demo Day are probably the 2 biggest violators of the Demo Day thing. I haven't run more Demo Days than I can count. I'm so bored of them, it's not even funny, and it's my company. And we have to fix that for the community because we think that, so I know everybody else thinks that. So, but we can do that now because we have enough resources and people around the system that can help fix that stuff where a single program is going to more struggle with that, right?
Yeah. And then thanks, Tim. I want to give you a chance to question before we open it up to the audience. And specifically, I'd be interested to know, are there things about the way that accelerators communicate, given that you're an expert in communications, that you think will either help sustain or hinder sort of their progress in the future?
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah, and I'll tie back to what Nicole just said. So I think the question about the sustainability, and I'll come back to the communication part. The question about sustainability is, what are the problems that accelerators solve? So if you take the perspective of the entrepreneur, they solve problems of access to capital and access to this network, as Brad was talking about, the network form of production, peer production. And so I think that if that's the perspective, accelerators are good at that, at least for the time being. If you take the perspective of, as a couple of people mentioned, the investor, there are still open questions about the degree to which that accelerators solve the investor's problem. But if we think about, as Brad was inviting us to do, accelerators as cases of peer production, to think about the communication practices. So one of the problems is potentially the idea that at the demo days, all the pitches pretty much sound the same, and that the curriculum that they go through is really not all that much different across the variety of accelerators, at least from what I've been able to glean. And so then the question is there something really unique being produced? And so in the communication practices inside the accelerator, are they producing some homogeneity that doesn't stand out against the crowd? And then from the perspective of peer production, if peers are participating in the production, it could be a possible outcome that those peers, the mentors, the other members of this social scene also ask for some peer governance, that they've largely been sort of hands-off in that. That could be something that addresses, perhaps even threatens the possibility, the future sustainability of accelerators more generally.
Okay. Thanks, guys. We're going to open up to the audience. First question from a student, if someone has one. Yep, back there.
Hi. So there's a lot of talk about reputation associated with being part of this, and there's a really strong signal with like a Y Combinator or a Techstars. How much is that policed when it comes to the actual entrepreneur? Because, you know, we had a class for Y Combinator, 120 for maybe 120, or 10 for 10. At what point do you not let people graduate so that that name doesn't get associated with that entrepreneur, because there are certain things you just don't want them going on?
So we have kicked out 7, 8 maybe companies over the years that I'm aware of. There might be a handful that I'm unaware of. The only reason we've kicked companies out of the Techstars program is because of bad acting. So it's usually that they have done something egregious and deliberate, and basically on purpose. So we believe in reputational risk. We believe in reputation through and through. We actually have published a code of conduct, and we take protecting the Techstars portfolio and its mentors and network very, very seriously. So will we eject bad actors? You bet. But we will go through, before ejecting somebody, very rigorous, conversations and discussions to make sure that the person is truly a bad actor, right? Is doing something. It's all about intentions, so we have to understand intentions. So to understand intentions is tricky, especially when somebody knows that they might get in trouble for it, right? So these are sensitive topics. They're very difficult topics, but it's something we take very seriously. Because it is a reputationally based program, everybody suffers when somebody comes in that's a bad actor. So we need to make sure that we purge the system of bad actors, both on the mentor side, on the corporate partner side, on the sponsor side, and on the portfolio company side, right? We look at it from all dimensions. It's a network. So actually, let me one other comment before that. I'm sorry, because he had his hand up. So at Techstars, we have a value that's, you've heard a little bit in the way that everybody's talked, although they probably haven't used these same words, is our value is network over hierarchy. So we try not to, we don't believe in a singular person that sort of governs all and makes all decisions. It's really network over hierarchy. So we use the group and the entire community to help make decisions. And I think that's a strength, right? And how we deal with problems. So.
Yep.
You mentioned that sort of the accelerator model favors scale, and Techstars is clearly growing very quickly. Do you have any concerns with consolidation in the market? And does anyone else on the panel have concerns with consolidation and possibly stagnation at some level of the accelerator model through overgrowth and consolidation, perhaps?
I've never thought about this consolidation element of it, but maybe that's because of where I work. The stagnation problem I think about every day. Probably every hour of every day, right? I mean, the model is not new anymore. And in entrepreneurship, it is about breaking things and innovating. And how does an organization like Techstars is in a great spot and also a very difficult spot to innovate, right? So I think about it every day. And we do little things. You'll see a lot of experimentation coming out of Techstars in the next 18 months because we believe in innovating. And if we're not innovating, then how can we ask our startups to innovate, right? So, I mean, thinking about it all the time. Do we have any great answers yet? No, but that's part of what experimenting is.
I would just say to that, I think, yes, definitely concerned about stagnation and oversaturation, particularly in well-established markets. I think Unreasonable is looking at emerging markets, and there we see like very little ecosystem and structure. We just have started a program in West Africa, and there's tons and tons of entrepreneurs. We have a program in East Africa. Every year we would get about 20 applications to our global program from East Africa. We launched a program there. There were 150 applications just from East African companies to that program. So there does seem like in some of these emerging markets, there is a lot of interest, but there aren't the programs that exist there. So I think it partially depends on where you are.
So the relationships of mentors are informal relationships, and so far the benefits have been implicit according to Brad's research. So I'm sort of curious now, thinking about this, of what is the effect of Brad publishing his research on the mentor market? So it's kind of an interesting question, right? Because it's kind of, does it create this January effect thing where everybody knows about the January effect, so it reduces the January effect, right? Does it encourage more mentors? You didn't go on the Techstars website to see the list of things that motivate mentors, but now people will actually know, oh, here's reasons why people do this. Does that discourage mentors? Does it encourage them? Does it increase the probability of bad actors? Does it reduce it? What do you guys think?
So I don't think, look, I think that the motivations, are what they are in terms of the sort of the initial motivations of being a mentor. And I think that those probably are not going to change. I think that, again, these accelerators are really nice, concrete touch points that don't exist elsewhere for people to be involved and to actually basically participate in something that they feel like they would like to participate in. Again, I will say, though, that I really wonder about sort of the sustainability of the same group of people and the limited group of people and their abilities to continually give in that way, and when does it sort of get old for them? And when isn't there sort of enough qualified people? There always will be interested people, but I think when do you sort of run out of the generation of qualified people potentially, and what scale? And so again, that points to maybe there's sort of like an upper bound of this thing that can exist, and it really just can't go beyond that.
I think I have one more question here in the middle.
Do you guys think that accelerators should establish guidelines for mentors and mentees? A couple of key areas. One, giving advice versus actually doing work. Say the mentor might give some guidance on how they might code something versus I'll just sit down for a couple hours and write the code for you. And another area, the amount of time that the mentee might come back to the well to get advice from the mentor.
So, we have something called the Mentor Manifesto, which actually does give some pretty specific guidelines. I think that most companies, most entrepreneurs understand the difference between an advisor and a mentor. A mentor is volunteer, and they are giving of their advice, their guidance and their experience. They are not actually rolling up their sleeves and doing work. So I do think that rolling up your sleeves and doing work is a different relationship. It's not a mentor relationship. It's probably an advisory relationship or a consulting relationship, right? But we do have, we pass out our mentor manifesto at every single mentor event that we do, and it's on the blog, and Brad Feld wrote a whole series of blog posts that broke down the mentor manifesto, and we're trying to constantly beat it into people's heads, not just the mentors, but the companies as well. And when we fail to do that enough is when we see problems. So should there be guidelines? You bet. Should they be pounded into people's heads? Yes, repeatedly, right? But we want to make sure that they're the right things and that people are there for the right reasons.
We try to structure the relationship as best we can in the beginning, but then know that at the end of the day, it's between the mentor and the entrepreneur. I think a lot of it is the accelerator environment is a dating environment, where we're creating that environment to connect and build that relationship, and then hopefully from there they continue forward. So for the first couple of weeks and months, they may operate under that structure, but it might evolve into a different kind of relationship, whether that's consulting, advising, whatever. But for the time that we have them, we are prescriptive about how they should relate. But then from there, we say, okay, you all are adults, go and figure it out from here.
So Brad mentioned that, of course, accelerators touch a ton of different players within the startup community, both the startups themselves, the entrepreneurs, mentors. And one area that there's a lot of need, at the very least a lot of press around, is diversity. We don't have a really diverse community. And that's exacerbated by the fact that there are reports from things like First Round Capital. They did a report, they reviewed 10 years of their investments and found that companies with a female founder did 65% better than any of their other investments overall. Where you have startups that have amazing mentors, but there are some out there that don't have a single woman on their panel of mentors, which means these startups, when they're being educated, are missing out on these opportunities to get other perspectives that could be empowering their companies. I'm just wondering how you go about addressing this issue. Do you take extra steps to bring in mentors who have other opinions, whether they're minority or gender-based? Are you educating investors on the opportunities that are present in diverse startups? Things like that. I'm just curious if there are ways you're reaching out into the community to help create change.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's definitely a struggle. Our mentor network is about 38% female, so definitely below the average, I guess, or 50-50. Our entrepreneurs also are about 45% female, so they're definitely, we've had classes of women entrepreneurs who said, we need more female mentors here, and we've understood that as a challenge. Each year we'll kind of recruit and curate our mentor network based on the types of entrepreneurs that are coming. And so particularly for our cohorts, we have very diverse entrepreneurs coming from all over the world, and so we will recruit mentors who have some sort of expertise in that area, in that part of the world, and we really try, for a lead mentor, we have to aim for it to be, if it's a women-led company, to be also a women-led mentor.
Oh, and do you look for those, for diversity or anything in the companies that you invest in? Is that something that you focus on and actively try to make sure exists, or?
So this is an extremely complicated question, right? It is sort of like, you can sort of look at the macro view of this and say, where does it begin and how far back do you go, and and sort of like all of the big questions that are continually asked about our society and sort of equality and things like that. So I'm not going to touch any of that. For me, at the end of the day, right, what matters is that we find great companies and they're teams that we want to work with and that we want to put money to work with, and we're going to bring in, because oftentimes we're not the only investor and we have syndicates and whatever. That's the criteria. I swear to God, it is, right? And if you meet those criteria, it doesn't matter, right, who you are at the end of the day, right? That is it. And so that I don't know how else to address it other than, it's relatively sort of straightforward in many, many ways because of the nature of what we're going after, right? We're looking for sort of great companies that are doing interesting things and people we want to work with, and that's it.
So I'll add, Techstars is a particularly egregious violator of the diversity standards, and being one of the females in the company, I think most of our programs average something like 10 or 12% diverse mentors, and it's appalling. So we have a strategic goal in 2016 of changing those numbers. In fact, we've got a spreadsheet that's 52 items, and it's been crowdsourced across the whole organization, and everybody's driving something different. But the reality of the situation is that the female talent at that level that we need to engage is way fewer than the number of their male counterparts. And I shouldn't say just female, underrepresented minorities, they're underrepresented. So they are way harder to find the kind of caliber person that you need to be in those roles. This doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means we have to work a lot harder to find them and bring them out, and that they're willing to do it. Because let me tell you, like as a female in tech, I love being the female on the panel, but at the same time it gets really old. Like I get sick of being asked because I'm the token female on the damn panel. Like, find some other damn females, right? But there are just not that many of us. So whose fault is that? Is that the people? Is that the panelists' fault, or is that our fault? Like, I don't know. It's complex. So at least at Techstars as an organization, we have committed to measuring it and working really hard to fix it. That doesn't mean we're going to, because we think it's complex. But we're committing to working towards changing it. But part of it is, hey, like, it's not just us. We all got to do this. This is a societal thing. This is like a group effort, right? And it's a very complex problem to solve. Like putting underqualified mentors to help startups is gonna hurt that population, all populations, not just the entrepreneur, but the group that they're representing. So we got to take people and elevate them to get to the knowledge and experience where they can be those leaders. And that takes years. That's not something, it's not like, oh, you're a female, you should do this, let go, right? You got to find the qualified people. That's hard. That's harder.
Tim, anything to add before we wrap up? Or?
Nothing smart, no.
Thank you so much for your time, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That was really good.
Yeah.